I never thought my life would unravel on a quiet Tuesday evening in the middle of October 2019. I can still remember the way the rain hammered against the windows of our Boston apartment, the soft hum of the dishwasher running in the kitchen, and the faint smell of Sarah's vanilla-scented candles burning in the living room. Everything about that night was ordinary, peaceful even, except for me. My chest was heavy, my hands trembling slightly as I sat on the edge of our bed staring at my phone, my entire world splintering with every passing second. People think heartbreak comes with loudness, shouting, accusations, chaos. But in reality, it was silent, completely gut-wrenchingly silent. I was numb, and yet my head was screaming. I didn't even realize I was crying until the tears rolled down my neck and dampened the collar of my t-shirt. That was the night I discovered the affair, or more accurately, the night I stopped pretending not to see the signs I'd been ignoring for months. But before I get there, you need to understand who I was before everything shattered, because the person telling you this story today isn't the same man I was back then. Back in 2017, life felt good. Better than good, actually. I was 31, working as a project manager for a tech startup in Cambridge. It was stressful, long hours, endless meetings, the constant grind of chasing funding and keeping clients happy, but I loved it. I was ambitious, driven, and for the first time in my life, financially stable enough to stop worrying about late bills and overdraft fees. Sarah and I had been married for 3 years by then. We'd met at a mutual friend's barbecue in 2013, and I swear from the moment she walked across that backyard with a glass of cheap red wine in her hand and that easy, unbothered laugh, I was done for. She was magnetic, the kind of person everyone naturally gravitated toward. She worked as an interior designer, loved indie films, collected vinyl records, and could quote lines from old British rom-coms like Notting Hill and Love Actually, without missing a beat. We were different, but we fit, or at least, that's what I thought. Our friends used to call us the stable ones. We were the couple who threw those cozy Sunday dinners, played trivia on Thursdays at the Green Dragon pub downtown, and spent lazy weekends binge-watching Stranger Things before anyone else was talking about it. We had this unspoken promise between us that we'd always have each other's backs, no matter how chaotic life got. I believed in us. God, I believed in her. Looking back now, I realized the cracks started showing long before I noticed them. Little things, subtle things. Sarah became more distant in early 2019 right after I got promoted. At first I thought it was the stress from one of her big client projects. She had this wealthy couple from Beacon Hill who wanted their entire penthouse redesigned, and I'd seen her spend hours sketching layouts, juggling suppliers and attending endless consultations. But it wasn't just work. She stopped laughing at my stupid jokes, the ones she used to roll her eyes at but secretly loved. She started going out with coworkers more often, sometimes not coming home until after midnight. And when I asked her about it, she'd brush me off with a quick kiss on the cheek and that practiced smile telling me not to worry. I convinced myself I was overthinking. That's what you do when you love someone, you rationalize the unease away. Then came the phone habit. Before, Sarah was the kind of person who'd leave her phone on the counter, buried under a pile of magazines, without a care in the world, but suddenly, she became protective. If her phone buzzed, she'd check it immediately. She started keeping it face down. There were nights, I'd wake up at 2 and find her in the living room, sitting cross-legged on the couch, texting with this faint glow on her face. I should have asked more questions. I should have followed my instincts, but I didn't. Instead, I doubled down on being the good husband. I surprised her with little gifts, booked us a weekend trip to Vermont, cooked dinner more often, thinking maybe I'd been neglecting her, maybe this was on me. I thought love could fix it. Then came October 15th, the day everything broke. I'd left work early to surprise her. She was supposed to be at home finishing a design proposal, and I'd planned this small gesture, picking up her favorite sushi from Momi Nomi and grabbing that ridiculous seasonal pumpkin latte she obsessed over from Tate Bakery. When I walked into our apartment, I immediately sensed something off. It wasn't anything obvious at first. The living room was spotless, soft indie music playing on the speakers, and Sarah's laptop was open on the coffee table. But then I noticed her phone, left unlocked on the couch. That never happened anymore. I didn't intend to snoop, I really didn't. But when I reached to move her phone to the table, a notification popped up, a message preview, and it was the kind of message that hits you in the stomach before your brain even processes the words. Last night was perfect. Can't stop thinking about you. My hands froze, hovering over the screen as my vision blurred. I opened the thread without breathing. Dozens of messages, late-night conversations, photos, weekend plans, inside jokes I wasn't a part of. His name was Mark, a co-worker from her design firm, and as I stood there, sushi bag in one hand, latte cooling in the other, scrolling through months of messages, I swear, I felt something inside me shatter. Sarah came home 20 minutes later, humming under her breath, carrying a tote bag from Trader Joe's like it was any other Tuesday. I must have looked pale because she stopped in the doorway, confused, asking me what was wrong. I tried to speak but the words caught in my throat, and when I finally managed to tell her I knew, she laughed. Not out of nervousness, not out of shock, she laughed. It was soft at first, almost like a scoff, then louder, this hollow, cutting sound that burned through my chest like acid. I think that moment hurt more than the messages, more than the betrayal itself, because it wasn't just that she cheated, it was that she didn't care enough to even pretend to be sorry. I broke down right there, sitting on the floor, shoulders shaking, struggling to breathe, and she looked at me like I was pathetic. That's the thing nobody tells you about heartbreak. It's not the betrayal itself that ruins you, it's the humiliation, the feeling that the person who once swore they'd protect your heart is standing there watching it bleed and choosing to do nothing. For weeks after that night, I couldn't function. Work suffered. I stopped talking to friends, even the things I used to love, football Sundays, late-night gaming with my buddies, long runs along the Charles River, felt pointless, but something changed in me. I didn't know it then, but that moment on the floor of our apartment, when she laughed at my tears, would become the turning point. That was the night I stopped being the man who begged for love, and that was the night the first spark of revenge, quietly, silently, started burning inside me. I don't remember sleeping that night. After Sarah laughed, that cruel hollow sound that still echoes in my head when I least expect it, I just sat there on the living room floor for hours. The sushi went cold on the table, the latte was untouched. At some point, she disappeared into the bedroom without saying another word. That silence between us stretched like a chasm I couldn't cross. By 4 a.m. I found myself sitting on the balcony, legs pulled to my chest, staring down at the streetlights below. Boston was quiet at that hour, the kind of eerie quiet that makes your thoughts louder than they should be. I remember the faint hum of traffic from the highway, the distant sound of sirens, and the bitter October wind cutting through my hoodie. I kept replaying her laugh over and over in my head, like some cruel loop I couldn't escape. It wasn't just the sound itself, it was what it meant. It meant I didn't matter. It meant the years we spent building a life together were disposable to her. It meant I had been nothing more than a convenient background character in her story while she starred in someone else's. At some point, I must have fallen asleep out there because I woke up around 7:30 to the sharp sting of cold air and the muffled sound of Sarah moving around inside. I stumbled back in, head pounding, eyes swollen from crying. She was standing in the kitchen, pouring coffee like nothing happened, like she hadn't just ripped my heart out 12 hours ago. And that's when something inside me snapped. I wanted to scream, I wanted to demand answer, but instead I just watched her. The casual way she stirred her coffee, scrolling on her phone, humming that same stupid indie song she always played, like I was invisible, like my pain didn't exist. Is this it? I finally managed to ask. My voice cracked. It sounded pathetic, even to me. Is this what we're doing now? She didn't even look up. I told you last night, she said flatly. It just happened. Just happened. 2 words. That's all she had to explain. Months of lies, hidden messages, late nights, and emotional abandonment. I asked her if she loved him, and she didn't answer. That silence told me everything I needed to know. The next few days were a blur. I went to work, but I wasn't really there. My boss, Kevin, pulled me aside during a meeting on October 18th, and asked if everything was okay. I lied, said I was fine, but I wasn't. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I'd lie awake until sunrise, scrolling through our old photos together on my phone, the trips to Cape Cod, the drunken karaoke nights, the lazy Sundays on the couch, trying to reconcile how the woman in those pictures was the same one who laughed at me as I fell apart. I started obsessing over Mark too, the coworker. His Instagram was public, so I scrolled through it like a masochist. He was 34, divorced, fit, and one of those guys who thought craft beer was a personality trait. His feed was full of weekend hikes, brewery shots, and pictures of his damn golden retriever. Every post made me angrier. This wasn't some faceless stranger. This was a real person who had inserted himself into my life without hesitation, without remorse. The anger kept building, but I buried it deep. I didn't know what else to do. On October 20th, I finally told someone, my best friend Jason. Jason and I had been friends since college, back when we both lived on ramen noodles and cheap whiskey. He'd been with me through everything, my broke years, my first big promotion, even the proposal to Sarah. When I showed up at his apartment unannounced, he didn't ask questions at first, just handed me a beer and waited. I told him everything, the messages, the affair, the lie. By the end of it my voice was raw, my throat tight. Jason didn't say much at first, but I could see the rage in his eyes. He hated Sarah in that moment, maybe more than I did. You need to leave her, he said finally. She doesn't respect you, she doesn't love you. I wanted to believe him, but it wasn't that simple. I still loved her. God help me, I loved her, even after everything. And that's the part nobody tells you, how your heart and your head become two different people in times like this. My head knew she'd destroyed us, but my heart kept clinging to the hope that maybe, somehow we could fix it. A week later, Sarah dropped the bomb. I came home from work on October 28th, to find her packing a suitcase. She didn't look angry or sad, just distant, detached. I'm staying at Emily's for a while, she said casually, like she was announcing dinner plans. Emily was her college friend, someone I barely knew. I need space, we need space. And then she left. No hug, no apology, no promise of coming back, just the sound of the door clicking shut, leaving me alone in an apartment that suddenly felt too big, too quiet, and far too cold. The days after she left were the darkest of my life. I spiraled hard. I stopped eating, barely showered, and sat in silence most nights, staring at the blank TV screen. The apartment smelled like old takeout and unwashed laundry, and I didn't care. Every time my phone buzzed, I hoped it was her. Most of the time it wasn't. When she did text, it was short, detached. Practical things like, can you send me my W-2, or did my Amazon package arrive? No apologies, no explanations, nothing that resembled the woman I thought I married. But here's the thing, in that silence, something inside me started to change. Slowly, quietly, I began shifting from heartbreak to anger. The numbness wore off, and what replaced it was something darker. It wasn't just about Sarah anymore, it was about me. She had humiliated me, she had laughed when I cried, she had chosen someone else and discarded me like trash. And somewhere in the middle of one of those endless, sleepless nights, I made myself a promise. I would not be her victim. I started small. I stopped checking her social media, stopped looking at Mark's Instagram. I deleted the photos from my phone, not because I wanted to, but because I had to. Every picture was a knife to the chest, and I was bleeding out slowly. Then I hit the gym. At first, it was just to get out of the apartment, to have somewhere to be that wasn't surrounded by memories of her. But it became more than that. I started waking up early, hitting weights, running until my lungs burned. It gave me control when everything else felt chaotic. Jason introduced me to a few new people too. We started grabbing beers after work, watching Patriots games together, filling the silence that used to be my constant companion. I wasn't better, but I was functioning. And then on November 9th, the trigger came. I was walking back from Trader Joe's when I saw them, Sarah and Mark, together, hand in hand laughing. They were across the street, heading into this little French cafe she used to beg me to take her to. I froze. The groceries in my hands suddenly weighed 1,000 pounds. My chest tightened, and I swear the city noise faded until all I could hear was the pounding of my own heartbeat. I didn't confront them. I couldn't. I ducked into an alley, waited for them to pass, and then walked home shaking, the bag handles digging into my palms so hard they left marks. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't break down. I didn't scream. I planned, because in that moment, seeing them together, I realized something crystal clear. Sarah wasn't just leaving me, she was erasing me, and I wasn't going to let her. After I saw Sarah and Mark together that night outside the cafe, something inside me turned cold. Not immediately, not like flipping a switch, but gradually, like a slow freeze, spreading through my veins. I remember walking back into my apartment, dropping the groceries on the counter, and just standing there in the silence. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint smell of stale coffee grounds in the sink, the ticking of the wall clock. It was all so unbearably loud, and yet the only thing echoing in my head was her laugh, that same cruel laugh, from weeks before. For days after, I felt like I was living underwater. Everything moved slower, people spoke, but their words sounded muffled. At work, I sat through meetings nodding along, while my mind replayed every second of that glimpse outside the cafe, Sarah's hand in his, her head tilted back in laughter, the intimacy of it all, as if the last 6 years of my life hadn't even existed. It was worse than the texts, worse than the suitcase, worse than her silence, because now I had seen it, seen her happy with him, seen the life she had built outside of me, and it destroyed me. The weeks that followed were a blur of self-destruction. I stopped going to the gym, stopped eating properly. Some nights I drank myself into a haze, whiskey numbing the sharp edges of reality. Jason tried to keep me grounded, but even he couldn't pull me out of the spiral. Thanksgiving came around, and while my family gathered in Connecticut, passing mashed potatoes and laughing over old stories, I stayed in Boston, alone in the apartment that smelled faintly of Sarah's perfume. No matter how many windows I opened, that loneliness was suffocating. It wasn't just the absence of her, it was the absence of us. I missed the routines, her humming in the kitchen while she cooked, the way she curled up against me on the couch, even the stupid little arguments about whether to watch The Office or Parks and Rec. My mind clung to the good memories, ignoring the reality of who she had become. I remember one night in December, I pulled out our old wedding album, sat on the floor with a bottle of bourbon and flipped through the photos, page by Sarah in her ivory dress, smiling at me like I was her whole world. Our first dance under twinkling string lights, surrounded by people who believed in us. My mom crying during the vows, and I broke down, ugly, gut-wrenching sobs that left me gasping for. I couldn't reconcile that woman with the one who left me for another man and laughed at my tears. It was like grieving someone who was still alive but already dead to me. Work was the only thing that kept me tethered, though even that was slipped. By December 10th, Kevin called me into his office again. He told me my performance had dropped, that he'd noticed I wasn't myself. He offered support, even suggested counseling through the company's health plan. I almost told him the truth, almost spilled everything right there in his office, but instead I nodded, forced a smile and promised to do better, because how do you explain to someone that your entire life has been gutted, that the person you trusted most had reduced you to rubble? Instead, I went home and stared at the ceiling for hours, the glow of Christmas lights from the neighboring apartment bleeding through my blinds. I hated it, hated the holidays, hated the forced cheer, hated that Sarah was probably out somewhere drinking mulled wine with Mark, while I was alone, drowning in memories. But slowly, in that darkness, something started to shift. The first time it happened was almost by accident. I was scrolling through my bank statements in mid-December, trying to get a grip on my finances now that Sarah was gone. That's when I noticed it, a series of transfers she had made from our joint account to her personal one in the weeks leading up to her leave. Small amounts at first, then larger, until nearly $5,000 was gone. It hit me like a second betrayal. Not only had she taken my trust, my heart, my stability, she had taken my money too. Quietly, methodically, preparing her escape, long before I ever realized what was happening. For the first time since October, I felt something other than sorrow. I felt anger, real, searing anger, and buried within it was the first flicker of clarity I'd had in months. Sarah wasn't just careless, she was calculated. She hadn't just fallen into an affair. She had planned for life without me, and if she could plan, so could I. I started documenting everything, every transfer, every suspicious receipt, every message I'd saved from her phone that night in October. I wasn't sure what I was going to do with it all yet, but I knew I needed a record. Evidence, proof that I hadn't imagined this, proof that she had dismantled our life piece by piece. Around the same time, I forced myself back into the gym, not because I wanted to, but because I refused to let her see me broken if we ever crossed paths again. I started running again too, long, grueling runs through the freezing Boston air, my breath turning to steam in the night. Every mile was a release, every drop of sweat a tiny act of defiance. Jason noticed the change. One night in late December, as we sat in his living room, watching the Patriots choke against Miami, he said, "You're different, man, stronger. I don't know what you're planning, but don't lose yourself in it." I didn't answer, because deep down, I already knew I was planning something. Sarah reached out once in January 6, 2020. It was a short text, just 7 words. "Can we talk? I think we should." My hands shook when I saw it. For weeks I had imagined her reaching out, apologizing,
begging for forgiveness. And now here it was, though the words felt clinical, detached, not at all like the woman I had married. I didn't respond right away. I waited 2 days, letting her stew in the silence. Then I wrote back. About what? She didn't reply until the next evening. About what happens next. What happens next? As if we were discussing a business deal, not the wreckage of a marriage. We met at a coffee shop near her office on January 10th. I remember the smell of burnt espresso and the sound of indie rock playing over the speaker. She looked different, thinner, paler, her hair pulled back tightly. Mark wasn't there, but I could feel his shadow in the room with us. She told me she wanted a divorce, said it like it was inevitable, like she was doing me a favor by being direct. I sat there, staring into my coffee, and for the first time in months, I didn't cry, I didn't beg, I didn't plead for her to reconsider. I just listened, nodded, let her think she was in control. But inside, I was already building my plan, because if she thought she could take everything from me, my love, my money, my stability, and walk away unscathed, she had no idea who I was becoming. That was the true breaking point. Not the texts, not the laugh, not the suitcase. It was that coffee shop on January 10th, 2020, when I realized Sarah was already gone, and that if I wanted closure, I wouldn't find it in her words, or in forgiveness, or even in divorce papers. I would find it in making sure she never forgot what she had done. And I knew, with a clarity that chilled me, that I wouldn't rest until she felt just as broken, just as alone, as I had.
By the time January rolled into February 2020, I wasn't the same man who had sat on that living room floor 3 months earlier, broken and sobbing while Sarah laughed at my pain. I was colder now, sharper, more calculated. The grief had burned away, leaving something harder underneath. Not hatred, exactly, but purpose. Every sleepless night, every freezing run through Boston's streets, every rep in the gym had been reshaping me into someone new, and now, I was ready. Sarah thought she'd won. That much was clear from the way she carried herself in that coffee shop meeting when she said she wanted the divorce. She thought she had the upper hand, emotionally, financially, even socially. But she underestimated me. The first step was getting my financial footing back. That $5,000 she siphoned from our joint account still burned in my chest like a brand. But instead of confronting her about it, I used it as leverage. I called our bank, requested statements, and gathered every piece of documentation showing the withdrawals. Quietly, methodically, I built a paper trail. Then I contacted an attorney, not just any attorney, the best divorce attorney in Boston. Her name was Lauren Mitchell, and she came highly recommended by one of Jason's colleagues. Lauren was ruthless, the kind of person who smiled sweetly in meetings and then tore her opponents apart in court. When I met with her on February 12th, I laid out everything, the affair, the money transfers, the texts. She listened, eyes sharp, nodding occasionally, then leaned back in her chair and said, "We're not just getting you out of this marriage, Daniel. We're going to make sure she regrets ever thinking she could play you." It was the first time in months that I felt like someone was firmly on my side. But revenge, the real kind, doesn't happen in courtrooms. It happens quietly, invisibly, like erosion wearing down a cliff, until it collapses. And that's where my second plan began. I started digging into him. At first, it was harmless, scrolling through his Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. But soon, I was cross-referencing his posts with Sarah's timeline, noting the overlaps, the inconsistencies, the little lies. One night in late February, I found something. Mark had been bragging on Twitter about landing a massive client for his firm, a multi-million-dollar hotel redesign. But a little research revealed the truth. He hadn't landed the client at all. A coworker had. Mark had simply attached himself to the project and claimed the credit publicly. I took screenshots. Then I went deeper. I created a fake LinkedIn profile, a bland corporate persona with a stock photo headshot, and used it to connect with a few of his colleagues. Over a couple of weeks, I learned more than I expected. Mark had a reputation at his firm for cutting corners and taking credit for other people's work. There were murmurs of him being on thin ice with upper management. That was my opening. I compiled everything, the bragging tweets, the discrepancies in his project claims, even snippets from casual conversations his coworkers had shared with my fake profile. Then anonymously I sent it all to his company's HR department, attaching a polite but concerned note about professional integrity issues. I didn't hear anything for weeks, but I knew it had landed. Meanwhile, Sarah kept trying to play both sides. She'd text me occasionally asking if I'd signed the divorce papers yet, offering friendly advice about dividing assets, pretending like we were two adults calmly working through a mutual separation, but I could read between the lines. Her messages were shorter now, clipped, like she was distracted. I suspected things weren't as perfect with Mark as she wanted me to believe. That suspicion was confirmed on March 7th. I ran into Emily, her college friend, the one she claimed she stayed with when she left me. We bumped into each other at Whole Foods, both reaching for the same overpriced organic peanut butter. At first, she looked like she wanted to bolt, but I gave her an easy smile and asked how she'd been. And then she slipped. Without thinking, she said, "I'm sorry about everything." I had no idea she'd been with Mark all those weekends she said she was staying with me. That one sentence lit a fuse in my head. Sarah had lied even to Emily, using her as an alibi while she disappeared with Mark. I thanked her politely, finished my shopping, and walked out of the store with my heart pounding, the plan forming faster now. By late March, the first cracks began to show. Sarah called me at 11:47 p.m. one night, her voice shaking. Mark had been suspended from work pending an investigation into professional misconduct. She didn't give me details, but I already knew why. I played dumb, feigned sympathy, acted like the supportive heartbroken ex who still cared. And the more she talked, the more I realized how fast her perfect little world was collapsing. Mark's suspension meant financial strain. He was living well above his means, leasing a luxury apartment in the Seaport district, driving a brand new Tesla he couldn't afford, taking Sarah to expensive restaurants she used to beg me to splurge on. Without his income, everything started unraveling. By April, she was the one reaching out more, asking if we could talk, if maybe we rushed into separation, if there was any chance we could start fresh. And God, I wanted to laugh in her face the way she once laughed at me. But I didn't. Not yet. Because the most powerful revenge isn't delivered in anger, it's delivered with silence, with patience, with precision. Then the pandemic hit. April 2020, the world went into lockdown, and everything slowed down, but my plan didn't. If anything, COVID amplified it. Sarah and Mark were suddenly trapped together in that tiny luxury apartment. No distractions, no getaways, no carefully curated Instagram dates, just two people stuck in four walls, their glossy affair forced into the harsh light of reality. By June, Jason sent me a screenshot from Mark's now private Instagram. Sometimes you think you've found happiness, and then the walls close in. I knew what that meant, and then in mid-July, I got the text I'd been waiting for. Mark and I broke up. No apology, no context, just that. I stared at it for a long time, thumb hovering over the keyboard, before locking my phone and setting it down without replying. That was the moment I realized something important. Revenge wasn't about destroying her, it was about watching her destroy herself, and she was doing it perfectly. By August, Sarah had moved out of Mark's place. Emily wouldn't let her stay. Her parents, who had always adored me, sided with me completely. Most of our mutual friends cut her off after learning the truth. I didn't need to scream, I didn't need to fight, I didn't need to lift a finger anymore. Sarah was alone, but I wasn't, because by September 2020, I had met someone new. Her name was Claire, and for the first time in almost a year I felt alive again. By September 2020, my life no longer felt like something I was trying to escape. It finally felt like something I was living again. Claire changed everything. I met her through a mutual friend at a small outdoor gathering. Masks, distancing, awkward elbow bumps instead of handshakes. But even in that strange, disconnected time, she felt warm, grounded. She wasn't flashy. She didn't pretend to be perfect. She asked about me instead of filling the silence with her own stories. After years of living in Sarah's shadow, where I always felt like I was auditioning for a role I could never quite land, talking to Claire felt like stepping into sunlight after months trapped in a cold, damp room. I didn't tell her everything at first. Not about Sarah, not about Mark, not about the long nights pacing my apartment, trying to stitch myself back together. But Claire had a way of making silence comfortable. She never pushed, just waited.
and eventually the walls I'd built came down piece by piece. By December we were inseparable. Meanwhile, Sarah's world kept unraveling, slowly, painfully, almost poetically. Mark never got his job back. From what I heard, he tried freelancing, but with his reputation ruined, no serious clients would touch him. Sarah had moved back into a small rental apartment, nothing like the carefully curated Instagram-worthy life she'd flaunted before. Friends who once adored her stopped inviting her out. Her parents were polite but distant, their disappointment lingering beneath every strained conversation. Even Emily, her last real friend, had pulled away after feeling used as an alibi in her lies. Sarah wasn't the golden girl anymore. She was just ordinary, and worse, she was lonely. The first time she reached out was January 14th, 20. The message was simple. "Hey, can we talk?" I stared at it for a long time. My chest tightened, but not the way it used to. It wasn't longing. It wasn't heartbreak. It was nothing. I didn't reply. 2 weeks later, another text. "I know I messed up. I miss you." This time, I didn't just ignore it. I blocked her number. In April 2021, our divorce was finalized. I signed the papers sitting at my kitchen table with Claire beside me, her hand resting gently on mine. It was quiet, peaceful, a stark contrast to the chaos of the last 2 years. When I hung up the phone after the final call with my attorney, I expected to feel something: relief, sadness, victory, but instead there was just silence, and for the first time in a long time, silence felt good. Months passed, Claire and I grew close. We started taking weekend trips, cooking together, talking late into the night about everything and nothing. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was chasing happiness, I was living it. And then in September 2021, almost exactly 2 years after I'd first discovered Sarah's affair, fate handed me the closure I didn't know I needed. Claire and I were walking through Boston Common on a sunny Sunday afternoon, holding hands laughing about something stupid, when I saw her, Sarah. She was sitting alone on a bench, earbuds in, staring down at her phone. Her once perfect hair looked unkempt, there were faint shadows under her eyes. The bright, polished energy she used to carry had dulled. For a moment our eyes met. Her face lit up, not joyfully, but desperately, like a drowning person spotting land. She stood, opened her mouth and took a step forward, and I smiled politely, nodded once, and kept walking. I didn't slow down, I didn't look back. Claire squeezed my hand, sensing something, and I squeezed back, steady and certain. In that single silent moment, everything came full circle. Sarah had laughed when I cried. She mocked my pain. She broke me down until I didn't recognize myself. But now, I wasn't broken anymore. I had rebuilt myself from the ashes she left behind, stronger, steadier and happier than I had ever been with her. And the most beautiful part of all was realizing I didn't need revenge anymore. I didn't need her suffering to validate my healing, because I'd won, not by destroying her, but by choosing myself. It's been over 3 years since that day in the park. Claire and I are married now. We bought a little house just outside Boston with a tiny backyard where we drink coffee in the mornings and talk about the future. Sometimes when the night is quiet, I think back to that broken man on the living room floor, the one who begged, who wept, who couldn't imagine life without her. I wish I could reach back through time and whisper to him, "You're going to be okay, you'll love again, you'll laugh again." And one day you'll see her sitting alone, and you'll realize she no longer has the power to hurt you. And when I remember Sarah's laughter echoing in my ears that night, mocking, sharp, cruel, it no longer stings, because now when I laugh, it's real.